Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. This is an IES webinar, a day in the life of a land condition professional. And today we're joined by Rae Watney, who is a local authority officer at Sheffield City Council. Rae's been a local authority officer specialising in contaminated land for the last 5 years, and prior to that worked in contaminated land consultancy. In 2021, she won Best Young Brownfield Professional at the Brownfield Briefing Awards. So in today's webinar, Rae will share more about the day-to-day of her role and her journey in the land condition sector. As always, there will be a chance for questions at the end of the presentation. So thank you all for logging in, and I will now hand over to Rae for the presentation.
So I work at Sheffield City Council as the Senior Land Quality Officer. And this is just a little bit of the tale of how I came to work in the public sector, why I chose contaminated land, because it's a little bit of an odd industry to get into. It's not one that at the careers fair at school you get told, yes, you should be a contaminated land officer. So a little bit of my story and how we got there. So why did I want to work in contaminated land? At school, I really loved the scientific side of geography. As a child, I was inspired by the natural world. I've always had a passion for communicating science, and I really want to help people and to make the world a better place. That's the very Miss World kind of answer. And I also have a love of working outside. So in these pictures here, you can see me at 9 years old, just having a great time in the natural world outside. The top right picture is me camping with girl guiding out in a hammock in a very cold May a couple of years ago. And yeah, just me out on a walk. So the natural world is really where I wanted to be. This is me at 9 years old. This is when I decided that I wanted to work doing something to do with rocks and geology. So I went on holiday to the United States of America, up and down the West Coast, and I was given a film camera for this trip. And I took a look back at the photo album for this talk, and I took 142 pictures on this trip. I went to Las Vegas, I went to Disneyland, I went to all of these incredible places. But out of those 142 pictures, 63 of them were just of rock. Even from a car window as I went. So natural world really inspired me. So this is Arizona and Utah. You've got Bryce Canyon, Antelope Canyon, the Grand Canyon, Monument Valley. This is just a rock face that I found incredibly interesting as a 9-year-old. So it's just, these are the things that inspired me and made me think, yeah, I want to work in geology and work in the natural environment. So many pictures of rocks. I was the rock nerd as a child. So I got to the point of, I want to do something in the natural world, but what degree should I do? I was interested by geology and always had been, but there weren't any opportunities in my local area to take it at A level. And when you haven't encountered a subject before, it's really quite scary to take that leap and say, I want to spend an awful lot of money and 3 or 4 years of my life doing a subject at university that I haven't even tried before. So I chose a related degree, which was a master's in environmental geoscience at the University of Bristol. I enjoyed doing it because it gave me real practical applications. So it wasn't just theoretical chemistry and maths, which were things I didn't really enjoy at school. I found them quite difficult. It meant that I had more opportunities to interpret data, to look at maps, to question the world, and to kind of be outside and do trips. These are some pictures from my field trip. We went to Tenerife and we mapped the different ecosystems and the different soil types of Tenerife. We've got the cloud forest in the top left and the arid desert in the middle left. The bottom left, we also went to the Isle of Arran on a mapping expedition to look at geological mapping through time and to teach us the real kind of fundamental basics of keeping your eyes out and being able to draw useful diagrams. And the bottom right is a very local one for me. It was on the Bristol Downs. We were learning how to do geophysical tests with big hammers and digging in little pads to work out geophysical properties of the soils. So university was a great time. I had an excellent time. I went to lots of many different places, made lots of different friends. But by the time I got to my fourth year and I had my master's, everyone around me was applying to graduate schemes and knowing what they wanted to do or going on to further academic pursuits. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. I applied for so many different jobs. And this is probably in about the month that exams were happening in when I realized that I would have to actually grow up and have a job. I applied for a PhD in nanoscience, looking at the applications of nano iron in remediation. I looked at jobs with the Environment Agency. I even went through the testing process to see if I wanted to be part of MI5. I did some civil service jobs. I took a look at jobs working on drilling rigs in the North Sea as a paleoceanographer, looking at tiny microfossils on the seabed. But ultimately, I found a job working as a graduate geo-environmental consultant at WSP. And I was really lucky because this was outside of the graduate schemes. It was completely out of season. And I was just fortunate that they were looking for somebody and I was looking for work. So being a contaminated land consultant, it's into my job goals because it meant I was working outside and traveling. I was working with data and data management and data processing. I did a lot of scientific risk assessments. In contaminated land, there's a lot of specific ways of approaching risk and evaluating risk, and then using your professional judgment to figure out whether things need to be done to address that risk. And I really enjoyed the scientific process of doing that. Report writing, I actually quite like report writing. Sorry, I know not everyone does. But writing reports and making sure that it was clearly communicated what the issues were on site and kind of getting that clear picture and saying, here is all the information. Here's the premise, here's why you're looking at it, here's all of the information, and here's the summary, and here's what you need to do. And I really like taking people through that process. I got lots of practical training in logging soils. This is a picture of me on site. We used to have initiatives for sending in good photos with us at work. And me and one of my workmates decided that one day we were going to take all of the corporate stock photos we could. So you're going to get a few of them throughout this report. But yeah, practical training and actually getting your hands on the soils and logging them to the British standard. Whilst I was a consultant, we went through a process of changing from writing it out in notebooks and to using a tablet to log that. So I helped implement that system. So I had a load of opportunities to develop not only these basic skills in both this field of expertise, but also how to be a working professional, networking, communicating with managers, how to be at work, working with subcontractors on site, managing people. But I also talked at conferences and helped design apps and worked with laboratories to improve their processes. So I got a really wide base of different things to do. Now we get the cool photos. It was a job where you had to be on site at 8 a.m. because that's when subcontractors start work. So quite often I would be up at 4 a.m. driving for drive to work, pick up all of my kit, drive to site, often 2 or 3 hours away, and then spend all day working from 8 till 4 and then make my way back home. So they were really long days, but sometimes they're rewarded with these beautiful, peaceful scenes across farm fields where the sun is rising and it's just absolutely gorgeous and peaceful until you introduce the drilling rig. But, you know, when you first get there, it's gorgeous and peaceful. You also get to investigate city centres and look at the industrial heritage and the industrial history of places that you've worked in. The one in the top right is a site where it's a 3.5 metre trial pit, and all we dug out were bricks. just loose bricks from the previous forge that used to be on site. And the bottom right is a soakaway. So it's quite difficult to just be purely geoenvironmental and contaminated land. So I did lots of geotechnical work on site as well, looking at infiltration rates. Infiltration rates on site. So we've got another cheesy stock image there for you. I also did lots of qualifications. So on the left, this is when I did work at a power station. So you end up wearing these flattering bright orange jumpsuits to keep you safe. They only tend to come in men's sizes, so this was extremely large on me. And I would walk around with these cuffs rolled up to my elbows, rolled over until they fit me. But yeah, doing those qualifications to be able to work in these places, and it's really beautiful and haunting, the industrial legacy of going into a power station before the cooling towers are brought down to do that final investigation to make sure that everything's appropriate and safe, or working on electricity substations. There's kind of an industrial beauty to those setups that I really enjoyed. You also sometimes find secret tunnels. That's a very exciting day on site. These secret tunnels extend all across the site. They were used to help move between different parts of the factory. They extend under the roads, under the train lines. They go everywhere. Unfortunately, they were also filled with pipes that had asbestos lagging, so we couldn't really investigate them very much. But they were like an incredible discovery. We got the archaeological team down, some people who are very interested in industrial heritage. Yeah, exciting days on site. And some days you just end up sat in a warehouse looking at tubes of soil and logging them, which, you know, it's a beauty in its own way, but it's not quite as exciting as secret tunnels filled with asbestos pipes. And before anybody asks that question, yes, we were in full asbestos gear. I live to tell the tale. I've got a nice little video now. Hopefully this will play. Yeah, so this is at a gas holder site, and I was supervising the moving of waste out of one gas holder to clear it out to another place where they had a pump set up to treat the water and to treat the soil before it went off site as hazardous waste. The smell of that is ridiculous. You can smell it from a mile away. It is black, it is shining, it is incredibly grim. But it is also fascinating that this soil has sat there for so long. I mean, we had to dig down a significant way. There was an office building on the site beforehand that had been built in the 60s. And this gas holder is from the 1900s. In fact, the bricks used from this gas holder were excavated and then treated and then taken away to rebuild another gas holder so that people could look at it in a museum, because it was such an old example of a gas holder. So they took all the bricks away and then used them on another site elsewhere to celebrate part of the heritage. That was really cool. I'm getting really excited about these sorts of sites, and it's always really exciting to go to a site where things are happening and where you feel like you're making a big difference. And that was part of what I realized when I went out onto site, was that I really enjoyed these big messy sites where cleaning them up was incredibly satisfying. We got rid of all of the things that didn't spark joy, all of this nasty waste, and we kept and recycled and reused so much material to keep on site, and doing it in a sustainable way and making sure that this material is all tidied up so that it didn't affect the river that is just beyond that black fence line is a really satisfying thing that I really enjoyed doing. Some days you also end up with a drilling rig in a warehouse. So this was a sonic rotary, just a rotary rig, and we ended up having water flush, so you can see it on the ceiling at the top. that all of this backflush was coming out the top of the drilling rig. And this was an old MOT testing garage that I think is now a hotel. And I got to spend a lot of days, a lot of my professional days, working with drillers and drilling rigs. And although these people aren't necessarily white collar professionals, they are incredibly good at their job, and they are incredibly supportive and respectful. Considering that I was, a graduate engineer, I didn't necessarily always get things right, but they were incredibly supportive subcontractors. And you get the occasional couple that try and take advantage of you and go, oh no, it's okay, don't worry, I'll finish that off, you can go home, and then they'll bum it out on site. But generally, the vast majority of drillers that I've worked with have been incredible professionals. And this kind of experience of working with these kind of people is not something that I encountered a huge amount in my life growing up or at university doing a degree. But these people are just as professional as people sat behind desks. And working with all these different types of people really kind of helps me solidify my decision for moving to the public sector. I mean, some more pictures. I also did a lot of work looking at ground gas membranes, making sure they've been installed correctly. This is not a well-installed gas membrane top pipe for this intrusion coming in. There's a little bit of a flap happening, and it wasn't sealed very well, and it's very, very messy. So I did make them redo it on this occasion. But I worked in such a large variety of different places. Some days I'd be out walking fields of oilseed rape and having a lovely walk in a field, doing a nice light walkover. Other days I'm on building sites looking at housing membranes. Other days I'm on brownfield sites digging up an industrial heritage. It was such a variety. So I guess the real question is, why did I move to the public sector? Local government is a challenge. However, now all of my decisions are guided by what's best for people, what's best for the residents in my area rather than profit. I was frustrated by a corporate structure that said that I needed to be an expert at managing margins for projects and managing people rather than simply being a technical expert in my field. And as a graduate, kind of moving through that graduate scheme, you're expected to become a project manager, but that isn't where my strengths lie. Moving to the public sector, I have far more flexibility around my work and I feel a lot more secure in my job. Working on site with the drilling rig and going out to all of these different places is great, but that really long day of leaving the house at 5, getting to site for 8 a.m., and sometimes not getting home until 7 or 8 p.m. at night, possibly for weeks at a time, it isn't great for a work-life balance. And it made making friends in a new area when I moved very difficult. Now I work a set number of hours per week. It's a lot easier to be more flexible in where I work and when I work. However, I wouldn't have traded working in consultancy for anything. It has made me a better local authority officer because most local authority officers don't have that first-hand experience that I have of being out on site and actually practically applying all of the guidelines that I now regulate. So I now completely understand the context of why certain decisions are made on site and why certain things are happening on site that are now kind of feeding through to that report. Because a lot of these guidelines are written with professional judgment in mind. I also enjoy having a space to be professional without being corporate and being able to kind of feel like I can be myself in a professional working environment and I'm able to network with people and still be professional and formal without feeling like I'm continually interacting with people and looking for profit. And that made a really big difference to me in terms of how I felt about work and how engaged I was with my work. being able to have that feeling of I'm working with you and I'm entirely committed to helping you solve your problems because there's a genuine risk and I can help you with that with my technical expertise. That kind of communication with a resident or with a planning officer or with a planning applicant, it's really clear that I'm in it because I want the best for the goals of having a better environment, being better for people. I'm absolutely not in it for creating profit or funds for my company. And I really enjoy that distinction. So that's why I wouldn't go back to working in the private sector unless it was in a really specific different role. So what do I do in my role as a contaminated land officer? I am responsible for a number of different things, but the main reason that my job exists is Part 2A of the Environmental Protection Act 1990. And this environmental law says that local authorities must inspect the land for which they are responsible, and they must inspect it in a logical and ordered way, and then make a risk assessment to see whether there is a significant potential of significant harm occurring. And if there is, it gives guidance on how that should be remediated, who is responsible for paying for it. But essentially, local authorities need to do that job of inspecting their land. This law is also the reason why the NPPF, the National Planning Guidance Document, I'll remember what the acronym is in a minute, why that says that for planning applications, sites need to be safe and suitable for use. And the underlying part of that is so that they cannot be determined as legally contaminated land under Part 2A of the Environmental Protection Act. So that's why my job exists. So as part of my job role, I write the contaminated land inspection strategy for the council. I help determine how the land is going to be inspected, and I help manage the inspection of that land. So some councils have all councils must prioritise their land and look at it and have a order of priority for looking at the different sites to say which sites are more urgent to look at than others. But the actual inspection, some councils have independent funding, internal funding to be able to undertake those inspections. Other councils are addressing their requirements via the planning regime. So they're looking through as sites come in under planning, and then they're saying, okay, well, if we've looked at them under planning, we don't need to look at them under Part 2A. They're slightly different regimes, but one of them is there any significant harm going on to the current use? Part 2A. And one of them is, are there any possible significant risks that might arise from any possible future use as proposed by this development application? And that's planning. So I look at planning consultations as well as part of that. So the planning officer will send a consultation to my department, and then I will advise on planning conditions for applications if they're needed. I'll review reports written by consultants, and I'll confirm whether they comply with relevant guidance. So I am the source of technical expertise that can say whether those reports that are sent in are sufficient to meet the requirements of the site, whether they're using good science, whether they're complying with the different guidelines. Yeah, so that's part of the planning work. I also help to write guidance documents. So I write internal guidance documents specifically for the council. So I might, on our website for Sheffield Council, there is a document which is when you're putting in a cover system, these are the ways that we would prefer for you to demonstrate, to verify that you've done it correctly for the correct depth. We require photos, or Yeah, we require photos. We might require depth pits with measurements. This is how many pits we require. It makes things easier for people to sign off. And these kind of guidance documents aren't national because different areas have different requirements. So, for example, somewhere that is predominantly rural, a rural district, a small rural council, won't have the same issues that I have in Sheffield, which has a significant industrial legacy. So, I'll write guidance for that. I also sit on national groups and help write guidance with them as well. So, that can help make sure that all contaminated land officers are more aligned on different issues, or it might help point them towards different kinds of guidance. In some cases, groups of councils get together and say, these are the guidelines that we're going to use. So I help to write those as well. I maintain GIS data. We'll come back to that in a minute. I respond to environmental information requests. So that's the environmental version of freedom of information requests for information about land. And I respond to questions and concerns from councillors, because ultimately councillors have been elected by residents to bring forward issues that are important to them, and helping communicate with councillors and address their concerns and be a source of technical expertise for them is also another really important part of my job. Occasionally, I get to go out on site. I spend the majority of my time at my desk now, but if I go out on site, it'll be because I've requested to, or because a consultant has contacted me and said, we're doing this on site, I think you'd like to come and see it. Or we're doing something slightly unusual on site. If you come out to site and see it in action, it'll help prepare you for when it comes in under planning later. I'll also ask to go out to sites where there's the potential for significant harm. So if I know that a site has potentially quite a lot of contamination, I'll want to kind of go out to site to make sure that if things do need to change, or if they're not quite doing things as guidance says, I'm able to help make that difference on site, rather than looking at a report and saying, oh, you did that wrong, far too late. I also sometimes visit residents with concerns about their land. I might not be able to kind of directly act on that because it could be a private insurance matter, or it might be something done by their house insurance. So, for example, if somebody had an oil tank in their garden to fuel their boiler, if that started leaking, I'd be able to help go and provide guidance to kind of help contain it. But essentially, that would be their own personal house insurance for that to cover. But I can kind of help them communicate with insurance and help them decipher complicated documents. I also do a lot of GIS data management. I think that maps are an underrated asset. Contaminated land includes a lot of spatial data, and you can look at lots and lots of reports that have tables in the back saying this is how much of this particular contaminant was recorded and this is what we're assessing it against. But having that context in the form of a map is far more valuable, because it helps you tie in all of that information in a way that's visually representative. In my job, I help to maintain that data that we receive. So the data that you can see on the map there is information from the Environment Agency, information from the Coal Authority, information about environmental permits, landfills. I just turned on all the layers and zoomed out. So we have a massive amount of information that we can have at our fingertips from our desk if it's in the right format. So I help to make sure that that data is easily accessible and is available in the most easily understandable and accessible format. So I build GIS tools on WebGIS to help interrogate those data sets. So I've got a tool where you click on a point and within 250 meters, it'll list anything on a historical map that might be potentially contaminated. Incredibly useful. And I also use that data to help make sure that when I read a report that has come in for a consultant for a planning application, to kind of help verify that they haven't missed anything, or that they haven't, or that they found all of the important information, or whether I have data that they're not aware of that might be important in making sure that risks to sites and people are minimised. On a day-to-day basis, I spend the majority of my time reviewing reports for planning applications. When a report comes in, my job is to say whether it has met all of the relevant guidance. If it has exceeded the requirements for the guidance and is, way too much, I still have to accept that report. My job is to make sure that it meets that minimum standard. The relevant guidance all stems from LCRM, Land Contamination Risk Management, which details how contaminated land risk assessment should be undertaken. And the site needs to be shown to be safe and suitable for use under the planning framework. On the right-hand side, you get an example of the sort of information that I get. It will be, with a report that includes all of that qualitative assessment. But I get information about where boreholes are, where they've screened in monitoring wells, what data they've taken, what contaminants they found. These are all from different reports, by the way, so they don't quite match up. But this bottom map is a really good demonstration of how they've used different colours and different hatching in order to kind of pull out the data and go, well, actually, we found this and we've mapped it on the site. So you can see that all of these results that were elevated are just in one area, and we can delineate that quite well. So that's really interesting. So I spend a lot of time reading reports, making sure that people are using the most up-to-date guidance and that they're doing it properly. I can't give a talk about contaminated land without showing the conceptual site model diagram. This is the general basis for risk assessment in contaminated land, is that there must be a complete linkage for risk to be present. So you can have a source of contamination, a pathway, and a receptor. So the receptor might be somebody like people on site or a nearby river. And there could be a source like a leaking underground fuel tank. The pathway could be something like migration through the unsaturated zone. However, if there is a break in that pathway, or if there is no pathway present because the tank's encased in concrete, then there is no risk because there isn't a pathway between the source and the receptor. All three elements need to be present. So this is the basis for all contaminated land risk assessment. So this is the kind of thing that I look at and go, have you found all of the sources? Have you listed out all of your receptors? Have you looked at all of those possible linkages between them? And have you used that in order to complete your assessment? So that is what I do when I read a planning application report. So that kind of is a list of the different things that I do. If you wanted to find a local authority job, there are different ways of doing that. Local council jobs or the local authority websites themselves. You can talk to local authority officers at networking events. Sometimes jobs are posted on job websites, or you might be able to undertake an environmental health qualification apprenticeship. So, for example, next week I've got somebody from Leeds Beckett University who's going to be shadowing me for the week, who's on an apprenticeship course with Leeds Beckett. Yeah, that just about wraps me up. I hope that was a good snapshot into my life, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Rae. That was a really interesting webinar, and it looks like we already have a couple of questions, so I will jump straight into them. So the first one is, given today's cost of living, what career advice would you give to aspiring sixth form students, say from working class backgrounds, who want to work in contaminated land, both in the public and private sector?
In terms of being able to get those jobs, I think it requires a degree still. I think it's quite difficult to get in on the ground floor with an apprenticeship. It's still an industry that is very degree heavy. But those related degrees can be from a manner of different environments. You might be able to come in from the side by looking at, quite often they have GIS data officers and things like that. So you might be able to come in on an apprenticeship from that angle. But generally it requires a degree. My general advice is to find a job, get everything possible you can from it and learn from it, and then keep looking for the next job. At the minute, the job market is such that moving from job to job helps your salary increase far more than staying at one company does. If you have ins with people, then yes, use those, talk to different people. But being able to move from different jobs and being able to suck up as much information from them as possible. I mean, I know people who've moved jobs every 2 years. It does get there. In terms of like topping out your salary, you will end up being paid a lot more in the private sector than in the public sector, because it's the public sector and we're government funded and our jobs are reliant on the taxes that people pay. That's my kind of general advice.
Great, thank you for that. The next question is, in terms of GIS, have you done any GIS data related to ArcGIS?
Yeah, I use ArcGIS exclusively. When I was at university, I did a little bit of work with QGIS as well. Before I started my job, I only did one module at university on GIS. I did most of my training on the job, and it is an intuitive system. Having a knowledge of general coding is really helpful if you want to do some of the more fancy things. So being able to kind of have that. But if you're really interested in it, there's a lot of online information. There's courses you can go through. If you learn on QGIS and you put that on your job application that you have knowledge in QGIS, lots of companies use QGIS. It's not that different to ArcGIS. It's a little bit of a learning curve, but they're very similar. So go out there, get that foundation in learning and doing it. But the majority of things that you want to do, you're either doing them day to day and they're quite easily navigable on the system, or it's something you can Google and learn a bit more as you do it. I spend so much time Googling, how do I do this thing in GIS? And then learning how to do it. You never stop picking up those skills.
Definitely. I think that's something that's really important, isn't it? That you can't know everything when you start a career, and you will just keep learning forever. We have one other question. What are the most common frustrations or errors you encounter when reviewing phase 1 and phase 2 reports? Specifically, are there recurring issues with missing information, inadequate risk assessments, or unclear recommendations?
I'm gonna narrow it down to three things that bother me. One is companies using templates, but instead of having a blank template for every site, they use the previous site's information. And you start reading a report, and then suddenly you get a paragraph that's about a different site and doesn't relate to this one at all. And that's a simple like proofreading error that slips through quite a lot of the time. And you read a section and you go, that doesn't make sense. That often applies to people who've used old reports to write a new report, which is great. I mean, save the work, save the time. If it applies, it applies. It's cross-relevant. Just make sure you proofread it, but make sure that it also refers to the current guidance as well, because guidance is changing all the time, and companies are expected to keep up with that changing guidance because we need to regulate to the most current guidance. The next one that is frustrating is things being put in the text but not being brought through to a conceptual site model. So you might do a site walkover and you go, oh, it looked like there might have been a tank over here. And then that doesn't make it into the conceptual site model. And because it wasn't in the conceptual site model, it doesn't get picked up at phase 2 for ground investigation. Or even the phase 2 started from scratch and didn't look back at the phase 1. And it's really frustrating from a regulatory point of view, because we've approved this report and then you've started a new one, but you haven't considered this old one at all. So that's kind of quite a common thing of, you said this, please can you do it? And the third one that is frustrating is people not fully explaining things. So being able to have that science communication skill of going, if somebody wasn't here, how would they know why I've done what I've done? So a lot of me being on site means I can fill in that gap and I can send an email going, did this happen? And they go, oh yeah, did I not say that? I'm like, no, you didn't, but that's okay. You've sent it in an email now, that's all right. But it's having that knowledge that I am reading this, it's going to take me maybe an hour to 15 minutes, half an hour to go through a phase one report. I haven't been on site. I haven't had the full history of the site told to me. I haven't sat there and poured through all the data. I'm relying on your communication skills to tell me what happened on site. So it's that kind of information of please just be incredibly clear. It helps.
Great, thank you. So I think in the interest of time, we maybe just have time for one more question. So have you encountered groundwater contamination in the course of your work? If yes, how can you use the conceptual site model in managing the risk?
Yeah. So groundwater contamination is something that I used to specialise in because I used to live in the south of England on a chalk aquifer. So groundwater risk was incredibly important because you're protecting that drinking water source. In the same way, the conceptual site model, it works exactly the same of what is the source of contamination, whether it's been quite often it's just made ground sat there from an old forge or from an old industrial facility. And that's got material there. You've got that question of, is it able to leach those contaminants? Is that able to get into the groundwater at all? If it is in the groundwater, how far is it spreading? Does it have the ability to reach the groundwater and still be an issue at that groundwater? And then the issue, of course, is what is there for it to contaminate? So up here in Sheffield and in Leeds, where I live, there's not a huge amount of receptors for controlled waters risk. There's a couple of drinking water extraction points, but the rivers themselves are losing rivers rather than gaining rivers. So they put water into the groundwater table rather than receiving water from the groundwater table. So, and the actual aquifers themselves are low risk because it's all coal mining strata. So it's kind of taking a look at it that way. I really would recommend looking into the different groundwater modelling things. If groundwater really interests you, take a look at doing site-specific groundwater modelling. There's programs like CONSIM, and there is the EA Remedial Targets Methodology spreadsheet. CONSIM is a paid product, but the Remedial Targets methodology is all available online. And there's a handbook that leads you through taking a look at all of those specific things and going, for my site, given what I've measured, is that a risk? And I really enjoy getting into groundwater modelling, but I don't see it so often anymore.
Great, thank you. That's really, really useful advice. I hope you found it beneficial and informative. If you are an IES member, don't forget to record your attendance using the IES CPD tool, and you can do that through the members area on the website. Just to flag as well that this webinar has been recorded and it will be made available on the IES website and YouTube channel. If you are watching this recording on YouTube, please do subscribe to the channel, like the video, and you can click on the bell to get notifications whenever we post. So that's all from me. Thank you again, Rae. That was a really, really interesting talk. And thank you to everyone for joining us.